Hey everyone, how's it going? You're watching Kogi Lumpur. In today's episode of How You Getting Effed, I'm going to talk about the time where I got effed for most part of my life. I'm of course talking about the abusive parents that I had and the abusive household that I was raised in and how I came to realize that I was in fact brought up in an abusive family. This is a much broader topic that I want to cover in detail. I actually attempted to make a video just now, which lasted all of 30 minutes before I decided to just axe it because I was just everywhere. There's so much ground to cover. I need a script to actually be organized and be as succinct and to the point with those many points that I have. And I'll do that some other time. I wanted to cover this topic because it is actually extremely difficult for a person to be in an abusive family and realize that they are in an abusive family. I only realized for the first time in my late teenage years after I had moved out to live on my own in America that my family, the same parents and the same household that raised me, were in fact the most abnormal bunch of people to have ever existed in my life. And a lot of people don't really figure it out until it's extremely late in their life, by which time a lot of those effects have already taken place and they're only starting from zero as to how to escape that situation and or mend themselves, especially from an emotional and mental state. So to kind of give you a quick background on the family that I was raised in a upper middle class at the time family in Malaysia. And the long story short, something that I've mentioned in previous videos before is that my dad cheated on my mom when I was 5 years old. And after she found out and called him out, he started beating her. And I was there to watch everything that went down. A few years later, when I was about 10 to 11 years old, my mom just completely stopped sleeping in the same bed, in the same bedroom as my dad. And she started sleeping with us kids in our rooms because she didn't want to have anything to do with my dad anymore. But at the same time, she didn't want to get a divorce. We'll get into that story in another video. But that's the long story short over here. I was blessed enough to have had an upper middle class upbringing in the sense that my dad paid for my education in the US, which is one of the ways that I used to escape that household and never have to live there again for the rest of my life. The other thing that was lucky also, maybe by luck and chance, maybe by the guy up in the sky, I don't know, was that my brain has somehow been extremely resilient. And I've been told this by two different medical professionals, one in Europe and one in Asia, that I'm extremely normal for a person who has grown up in such an abusive household. So to give you the context over here, my mom is someone with, I think, heavy narcissist personality disorder. My dad has some kind of narcissism going on with him, but his primary problem is really some kind of borderline and or bipolar personality disorder where he's super unpredictable. He'll be like super angry and like scolding and yelling and shouting and even beating people, beating us kids, and also beating my mom and my grand aunt, who were 20 years his senior and living with us throughout most of my life growing up. He'll beat them too because they'll try to step in and stop him from beating us kids, and he'll end up beating them. These old ladies in their 60s and 70s. He doesn't care. So the way that I found out that my upbringing wasn't normal was when I went to school in the US. So I had a roommate, his name was Ian, and Ian came from a kind of stereotypical redneck American family. He was 6 foot tall, over 200 pounds, and loved high school football. And his dad drove like a big white Ford F-250 truck, loved hunting, loved guns, and had this huge ass handlebar mustache, like all the stereotypes. And he always wore this like lumberjack kind of attire. And they were the nicest people that I've ever met in the US, despite fulfilling all those stereotypes and whatnot. And they may or may not be Republican. Unfortunately, I lost contact with them after a bunch of shit that my mom stirred in my senior year. But during the time when we were on good terms, what Ian would do was he would treat me as family, because they saw this Asian kid who was 8,000 miles, 24 hours of flying and layovers combined away from his nearest family, and they kind of quasi-adopted me. So in addition to being, roommates on the weekdays, what Ian would do was he would either bring me back to the small town that he was from. We were in a small town, but he was from an even smaller town, some 45 minutes down south. Or his family would come up and spend the weekend with us in the bigger small town. And the reason why he was living in that apartment with me was really, I would say, a blessed reason, because it was a first world problem of not wanting to commute 45 minutes each way to school every single day. That's why he wanted to live right next to school, which is how he became my roommate. So throughout this course of knowing Ian and his family, I also got to sit in very closely with his family day-to-day interactions. So it's easy to spend time with your friends and their family, but not really get to know them, because you only spend like short periods of time. But in the case of Ian, like it was like a every single day kind of thing. And during the weekends, even during Thanksgiving, like family holidays, I would spend the time with them. And at some point after doing this long enough, you start seeing like the reality of the family, which includes fights. And the one fight that stood out to me was between Ian and his dad, which was, who were usually the two people who were getting into arguments with one another in the family. Ian had gone on a Saturday, the previous day, to some kind of friends gathering or something. They had some barbecue ribs. It was a cookout of some sort. And the next day on Sunday, his parents came to visit us and they took us out for lunch. And what happened during then was they were trying to figure out where to go for lunch, and his dad wanted to go eat Famous Dave's, which is a popular barbecue rib chain in the US. And Ian said no, because like he just had the same shit yesterday. He don't want to eat the same meal twice in 24 hours. He wanted to go eat pizza. And his dad said, no, I'm going to eat my barbecue ribs because you've eaten yours, but I have not had mine. And this kind of went back and forth for a while, and it kind of ended with his dad saying, look, man, I'm the dad over here. I'm the driver in the car. I'm calling the shots. We're going to fucking Famous Dave's. And so off to Famous Dave's we go, and we stop the car, we get out. Ian's sulking. His dad's kind of having the smug but semi-serious, semi-upset look on his face. And we walk into freaking Famous Dave's. There was like an awkward moment of silence for like 10 to 15 minutes before Ian's dad asked him, you good? And Ian looks up at him and he says, yeah, you good? And the dad says, we can have your fucking pizza some other time, but today we're gonna have the freaking pork ribs and Famous Dave's. That was it. That was the end of the fight. And this was super eye-opening and mind-blowing to me at the time, because I had come from a family which had fights literally every single week. The longest we would go without a freaking screaming match was like maybe 2 weeks. And the only time where it would stretch out longer was when my dad was on vacation on his own somewhere, which was basically never until we were adults, until we were much older and he started going to places like Korea to visit his friends. That would never happen. So there was a screaming match in my house, in the house that I grew up in Malaysia, every single week. And to give you kind of like a preview of how much society gave a fuck about that, no one ever called the cops, even though it sounded like someone was screaming bloody murder half the time. None of the neighbors cared. So this was such a frequent occurrence over petty shit, right? As petty as Ian arguing with his dad to go eat pizza over pork ribs. In my family, arguments would start over stupid shit like my dad losing his wallet. It's not even anyone else's fault. It's just him and his hoarder mentality and hoarder tendencies that he has, which we'll cover in another video. The house was just filled with junk at some point when I was 13 or 14, and it just has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. And I'm thankful to have not stayed there for almost 1.5 decades at this point. So it would start with something like that. He can't find his wallet. He'll start screaming. He'll start blaming people for touching his shit, but no one ever dares to touch his shit because we know the consequences of that. But he'll blame us anyway. And if he doesn't find his wallet fast enough and or someone doesn't try to quell the argument fast enough, it'll get to the point where he'll start beating people with his hands, with his belt, with his golf clubs. So I never realized that this was abnormal. And it wasn't helped by the fact that my mom, who's a narcissist / enabler for my dad, we'll get into her story some other time. But the long story short over there is at some point she expressed so much concern that the house was so messy that she didn't want anyone to come over anymore. And she wouldn't allow me or my siblings to have any of our friends over. And even for us to go visit our friends, because her fear was that we'll go visit our friends and they'll say, hey, you visited us before, can we go visit your house? No, she didn't want any of that. So as a result of that, and also the bullying that I faced for most part of my schooling years, I was never really exposed to how other families operated. It was only in the US when I was given the chance to live alone and I happened to bump into Ian and his family and look at how their family worked like, that I had the opportunity to realize, holy shit, is my family some sort of abnormal? And it wasn't like an immediate realization that, shit, my family's abusive, man, fuck all of this. It wasn't. It was like a slow grind over the next 5 to 10 years, literally. You know, the next level of escalation only came when I was in my mid-20s, when my sister told me that our mom is a narcissist. That was the first time that I ever heard of that term, and I started researching the behavior that comes with a person with narcissist personality disorder, and most of those things seem to describe my mom to the freaking T. And like I said, this is a longer ass story, but I just wanted to put this out there for anyone who's possibly in an abusive situation with their family at present time, or has reflected back after this video and realized that they've grown up in an abusive household, that this is what it looks like. This is how long it takes for you to realize that your family that raised you was completely fucked. And the reason why a lot of people, including myself, don't realize this most of the time, in case you didn't get it when I said it a couple of minutes ago, is because given enough exposure to those, and whatever childhood environments that you were raised in, it's the only exposure that you have. You don't really know that that's abnormal. Hindsight is always 20/20 when you see things, how things work in other families and read up on psychology and figure things out as an adult. But it's extremely difficult in the moment to realize that your family's not normal at all. And I was told by my mom, by society around me, including the very friends and family whom I came out to when I was in my mid-20s, I came out about the fact that my family was extremely abusive, because prior to that, there were a lot of, let's say, measures that my mom especially would take to prevent this reality from being heard and leaking out of the house that we lived in to other people, relatives, friends, etc. So everyone thought that everything was good. And when I came out with this information to everyone, it wasn't just my mom who was saying that, all parents beat and scold their kids. My very own family and friends were telling me to give my dad a chance because every parent scolds and beats their kids. Oh, do they now? Do they start taking out their golf clubs and their hammers and threatening to literally kill you? Do they say things like, I wish that you were better off dead, to both you as kids and your grand-aunts? My dad has told my grand-aunts multiple times throughout the years that I've grown up, I can't wait for you all to pass away. I can't wait for you all to die and get out of my house. The same house that my dad didn't put anything towards its down payment for, because my mom and the same grandaunts that he's cursing to death were the ones who forked out the down payment in the first place. He was the one who started scolding my mom when she told him about down paying for the house, because his first question was, how are we gonna eat? Who's gonna pay for that? And he immediately started scolding her for buying a house for the family that they're about to raise. You think any of this shit is normal? And that's it. That's the appetizer to my abusive family that I grew up in. And it's also an appetizer, or maybe an additional piece of the puzzle, as to why I talk about my distrust towards society, the NPCs and the normies who like to parrot stupid shit that they hear without doing any research whatsoever, to the detriment of everyone else that they spew that bullshit to. The same people, the same kinds of people who have told me things like, oh, you should have started your own business. You shouldn't get into day trading because 95% of the people who try that end up losing their money and failing. Do you think that you're really going to be part of the 5% who succeed? The same people who are saying those statements today were the same people telling me that all of this was normal and it's expected in every family. There are arguments and fights and parents beat their children. That's completely normal. Now you get it, I hope. But if you don't, there is always more videos under this umbrella, which I'm going to cover in the future. And you'll be rest assured that you'll see them in full detail, full transparency on this channel. So if you're not subscribed already, be sure to freaking hit the subscribe button. I feel really shilly at this moment, but freaking click the subscribe button. And if you have any thoughts about this whatsoever, I would love to hear them in the comments down below. Again, YouTube's not my job. I never plan to make it my full-time job, but I just want to get PSAs like this out there in hopes that someone who is in a shitty-ass situation like I was in the past will be able to realize that at a rate that's much quicker than I did, and not learn through the process of banging my head against the wall and making a shitload of mistakes before finally realizing, oh, I'm making a mistake. That's how I learned most of my lessons. I wasn't born smart with all this knowledge. I learned the shit out the hard way. So that's it for today, and I hope you learned something. See you all in the next video. Goodbye.